Okay, so today we are not reading this. Sorry for the share. Today we are reading this. What is this? What is this? It's a very big thing, but it's just a use state common mistakes. It's a good article, so I just tried to use it out and see how we can do it. So let's see. Five common use state mistakes React developers often make. Okay. So introduction. The most challenging aspect of developing any application is often managing state, right? However, we are often required to manage several pieces of state in our application, such as when data is retrieved from an external server or updated in the app. That's right. The difficulty of state management is the reason why so many state management libraries exist today, and more are still being developed, by the way. Thankfully, React has several inbuilt solutions in the form of hooks for state management, which makes managing state in React quite easier. So now it's no secret that hooks have become increasingly crucial in React component development, particularly in the functional components, as they have entirely replaced the need of class-based components, which were conventional way to manage stateful components. बढ़िया, thank you, Alexa. Okay, so the use state hook is one of many hooks introduced in React. But although use state hook has been around for a few years now, developers are still prone to making common mistakes due to inadequate understanding. The use state hook can be very tricky to understand. I remember it's written tricky, but it can be very tricky to understand, especially for newer React developers or those migrating from class-based components to functional components. In this guide, not guys, let's explore five common use state mistakes. Okay. Now, first, we'll try to understand in a very simple way what is a use state. So the use state is like a hook in React, which is very often used for fundamental hooks. Like we can introduce state variables into our functional components. The hook returns an array with two elements, the current state value and a function to maintain its set or maintain or set the value. So suppose the count, count is the initial, which is made as 0, and the other one is simple, right? Is just like a value. So now in the above code, we can see that count is state variable, set count is a function to update it. Whenever we need to change the state, we'll call set count with the new value. It is just a way to deal with the state easily in your component without class components. Okay. We love use state because it allows us to keep our components super clean and very easy to read. It's one of the main reasons why functional components are so powerful in React right now. Initializing the use state wrongly, that can be the one, I think. So initializing the use state hook is incorrectly is one of the most common mistake developer make it utilizing it. What does it means initialize use state? To initialize something, you need to set an initial value. The problem is that use state allow you to define its initial state without using anything you want, like you can use boolean, number, and all those things. So suppose in this example, you have initialize a user with use state 0, and then you are doing user.name, user.bio as this. So output will be what? Nothing. And because reading image, so what is there? So if you see what happened is we have a component expecting a user object stating the username, image, and bio. And in this component, we are rendering the user properties. Okay, so now when we inspect the error, we see image. Why? Because you have name and bio, but not image. You do have image, but you can see it, right? There is no user.image. So the proper form will be what? Is will be to declare an object. So you have just initiated a normal thing. So if you see, never newer developers often make these mistakes when initializing their state, especially when fetching data from a server or database, as the retrieved data is expected to update the state with the actual user object. However, this is a bad practice and could lead to expected behavior. So you need to pass it the expected data type to avoid potential blank page errors. Okay. Now, it can take us now we can take this a notch further where we can initially define this. So once it renders, it will give us this. Now what we will do? Now the second option is not using optional chaining. What is an optional chaining? But let's decide what is this. Sometimes just initializing the use state with the expected data type is often not enough to prevent the unexpected blank error. Okay, this is especially true when trying to access the property of a deeply nested object buried inside the chain of a related object. So typically, if you can see the chaining after user dot names dot first name. If suppose user is not exist, nothing will come up, right? If names does not exist, nothing will come up, right? So same thing we did here, and it will give us ta-da, there is no name. So now what you should do is you should use a question mark operator or option operator and then dot. So it's just like operator is like an optional chaining part. So then if it presents, then only you will get it. However, this does create separate branches when you are doing the testing. So you need to take care of that. But like if you're quite sure that if it's null, it will be like shown by the GraphQL layer or by the backend layer automatically, then you cannot I can say that okay, we can skip optional chaining for that particular node. Okay, and now let's directly come to updating use state directly. The lack of proper understanding of how React schedules and update states can easily lead to bugs in updating the state of an application. So when using use state, we typically define a state and declare, directly update the state using a set function. For example, we have defined it here and we have used const increase set count plus 1. Okay, directly we are updating the state here. The output will be this. You can see. So this works as expected. However, directly updating the state is a very bad practice. It could lead to a potential bug when dealing with the live application when several users are actually using it. Why? Because contrary to what you may think, React does not update the states immediately, but when the button is clicked as shown in the example demo, instead the React takes a snapshot of the current state, schedules this update to be made later for performance gains. This happens in milliseconds, so it's not noticeable to the human eyes. However, while the schedule update is still in pending transaction, the current state may be changed by someone else, okay, such as multiple user cases. This schedule update would have no way of knowing about the new event because it only has a record of the state snapshot it took when the button got clicked. This could result in major bugs and weird behaviors in your application. So what you should do is you should do this. You should do a async update where you have a set timeout and then which can have a delay of 2 seconds. Now let's see what happens. Pay attention. See, so it's a bug here. So why? But when we are start by clicking on the first add plus one button twice, which updates it to 2. After which we click on add plus 1 later, that takes a snapshot of the current state. Okay, that if you can see this one and this one, there are two things, right? So at that time it's taking the snapshot, and however the asynchronous schedule we have clicked on multiple times. Okay, now you have clicked on it, but it will again go to 3 because the when you took this one, this is a normal update and this is the async update. So async update after timeout, it took the snapshot when the count was 2 and it add one value to it. So the value becomes 3, but in the real time application, you have moved to 5, right? So what you can do? So you can do an update here. You can do an async update here. And what you have done here? Can you see you have clicked on update and this. So you have used set count and you have used this one. Okay. So it's use state and so let's modify the example demo to use a functional update instead of direct update. Okay. So like is count is update, that is this one, and async update, that is this one. So it actually takes a current count here and it does not takes a current count here. So what you have done is you have taken a value from a previous state Okay, and then you add it to 1. Okay, so that is the way you can do it. So it's almost like you are taking the state value and then doing it instead of taking the snapshot value. So what you can do is you can have a current count and then you can do it. So this set count will always have the current value, right? Now updating a specific object property. So suppose you have a use state called John and age, and then you are wanting to change the name for user.name to Mark. Okay, and what will happen here? Let's see. So you get a new entry, and then there is a hook. So now the state is updated, and you get the status mark. As you can see, instead of the specific property getting modified, the user is no longer an object, but has been overwritten to a string mark. Why? Because the set state assigns value, whatever value returned or passed to it as the new state. This mistake is very common in React developers migrating from a class-based component to a functional-based component, because class-based doesn't have all those things. What you do this dot state dot user property is equals to new value in class-based components. So one typical old way of doing this is by creating a new object reference and assigning the previous user object in the user names directly modifying. So basically what you do, you create, do all those things. Basically object dot assign to the user object and do the name as mark. So it can do, but what you can do is you can use the ES6 spread operator. So now you see, you can just shoot dot user, and then you can say the mark. So it can go to the object, fetch the name, update the name, return the object. Okay. So this is how it is for the object updation. Now managing multiple input fields in form. This is the best thing which you will actually use when you are trying to build a real-time application. So there are a lot of fields. You have done a lot of changes. Now, furthermore, we have created a handler function for each one, right? To establish a bidirectional flow that updates each state when an input value is entered. This can rather become redundant and time consuming, as it involves writing a lot of code that will in further reduce the readability of your code base. So it is possible to manage using a user of things like set user, use state, and there is an object. Now you can do first name and all those things, but then you can render the UI like this one. Now, after which we can create a handler event function that updates the specific property of the user object to reflect the changes in the form whenever a user types something. This can be accomplished using a spread operator like we did, like and dynamically accessing the name of the specific element that fired the handler using the function event.target.elementsName event.target.value. Okay, so now what you will do, you do a handle change function which takes an event, and then you do a set user, takes a previous state, do a previous state on spread operator on the previous state, check the value and do this. Okay, so on every update it will do that, and on everything you can do on change and you can have that function there. So now this is a very good use case. Now bonus optimize performance when using use state. So we wanted to give you a heads up on some tips to optimize performance when using use state within a React application. With every use state, by default, every state change of our component will trigger a re-render. That is completely cool and normally works fine. In larger and more complex application, this could, in the worst case scenario, become a performance bottleneck. And one way to optimize that is by using functional updates. In your new state, if your new state depends on the previous state, then using a function for updates ensures no necessary re-renders with set states. So suppose you have a count and set count. So on every increment, this will take the previous count and increase it to 1. And another great tip is always remember is try and keep the number of state variables in your application to a minimum. Use group related parts of your state to one state object, using an object instead of multiple calls to use state. This can help reduce the number of renders and make your code more manageable. Finally, React.memo for functional components or pure component for class components will prevent re-renders if props or state don't change. Optimizing How state manage with use state will bring a huge performance gains to the app. Now let's talk about use reducer for complex state management. Another great pro tip on dealing with complex state in React is to use reducer. Even though use state is awesome for dealing simple state, use reducer can sometimes be more efficient for dealing with bigger state logic. Pretty much reuse reducer, it acts identically to use state but lets us deal with state transitions through a reducer function. This is helpful in two cases. Either the state has sub-values or the next state depends on the previous one. Here is a quick example. So suppose there is a reducer function which takes the state and an action. If the action type was increment, it will increment. If the action type was decrement, it will decrement. Otherwise, it will throw an error. Now, how will you call a use reducer? You can use a state dispatch constant. You can have a use reducer and initial state. Now you can have two function where you can do dispatch and you can do a type increment, type decrement. So in this way the code becomes much cleaner and maintainable when using use reducer. Also, it's quite similar to what's actually happening in redux. So this is a great stepping stone if you are going to use redux in the future. I find UReducer extremely helpful for managing complex states. It worked wonders in terms of maintainability and readability for code. So this is a good one, and let's stop it right here and we'll reconvene later for sure. Have a nice day, and how do I? Okay, bye bye.